Okay, and we're recording. So, all right. So this is round two of
Yeah.
our discussion on East and West concepts on philosophy. And since I've been talking to Eric, I've been really thinking about how I really begin to see the divide from an East and a Western approach. And I've also seen it in medicine as well, because as a Chinese medicine practitioner, like when we treat the body, we're treating the subtle things. We're not saying, hey, this is a diagnosis. We're actually treating the symptoms, because it's the symptoms which accumulate over time that lead to a diagnosis, and what the West would consider a diagnosis. And so when we treat in Chinese medicine, we're looking at things like insomnia, anxiety, your stress levels. For women, your menstrual cycles, from when does it start, how many days, when does it end? And then for men, I'm asking, well, at least for me, I'm asking for questions as far as, all right, how's your morning erection, your nighttime erection? And the reason why I ask these questions is because they tell you how to find a canary in the coal mine as far as so for men, I asked about nighttime erection, morning erection. The reason why I asked that is because that's your hormone levels. And so that determines your hormone levels. And the moment, we notice that as men start to get age, and then the testosterone levels and everything starts to kind of drop a little bit, they notice that they started having a little bit more problems with the ED. And they're getting up to go pee more because that erection isn't there to stop the flow or stop the trigger the brain for them to get up and go urinate. Mm-hmm. So these are the things when I ask questions, people, my patients, they're like, well, why are you asking that? And I said, I know it sounds strange. And I also ask women too. I was like, well, how's your libido? And it sounds strange, but in the East, when you start asking for all these particulars, you really start to see how the body begins to function. Mm-hmm. And I'll say one more thing, because I might lose it. One of the things I started thinking about is that the way that the Chinese view qi is very much like math, the way that the West views math. And so when we understand that platform, and you take that and you plug it into the body, you start to see, oh, okay, so there is a formula to this. And so that's why Western alchemy versus Eastern alchemy is completely different. But it's fantastic here. So one of the topics I wanted to talk about is basically like Yin Yang. Mm-hmm. And people say yin and yang, or yin versus yang, but that's not right. It's yin yang, meaning like male female or female male. And the idea behind that is because it's two sides of the same coin. You can't explain one without discussing the other. Mm-hmm. You can't have night without having day. And so in basic yin and yang theory, the idea is that there is yin and yang, masculine and feminine, hot and cold, up and down, and that these all have cycles. So every phase, so when you look at the year, it's just observation of our own reality, such as you look at the seasons, you know that spring, summer, fall, and then winter. And we know that this happens every year. And when you look at ancient civilizations and how they took astrology and they measured everything, we begin to see that there are phases, and that things do end in order for new beginnings to become. And so this is how I view life in general. So you get to you meet somebody, and then that's the spring. Everything's wonderful, things are growing, things are blossoming, and then fall hits, and then winter comes. And when winter comes, that's when you're really tested, and then you gotta hunker down, bear through, and then another spring begins again. So it's just really just the natural phases of life. And so
it's interesting you bring that up. One thing I do remember from my time living in China was an intuitive sense about exactly what you just said, the seasonality of life, and on different scales. I mean, there's the annual seasonal cycle, but I'll never forget, I was speaking with the grandfather of my Chinese instructor, whose name is Anjie Chen Anjie. And his grandfather obviously lived through a great deal. And that's why I explicitly asked to meet him. I wanted to meet somebody who survived the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, that lived in Imperial China before all that. And it was such an eye-opening experience. But one thing I gathered from that, sort of one of the ways that they find the West immature, and I have to agree, is lack of the large-scale seasonality of life. If you are 85 years old and the number one priority in your life is still your golf score, you are in a state of arrested development. Right? You have stopped growing. And that idea, I met them, I was doing all this when I was about 27 years old, right? So that would be the end of the springtime of my life, the end of your youth. And it goes into a summer of more mature activity. You're still young, you're still vibrant, but you're not a youth anymore. You don't know nothing, and so on. But the idea was that by the time you're like a grandparent or approaching retirement, it should be a great deal of acquiescence involved in that, because you don't have to worry about things anymore, right? When you're a young person, the decisions you make carry extreme consequences. You know, do I go into this field or that field? Well, that's going to affect the next 20 or 30. Do I marry this person? I mean, it's all huge. You've already fought all those battles by the time you're in the winter of your life. You should have anyway. And the proper role they see of an elder is a calm, observant, a speculative person simply reflecting on all their, you look at my grandkids run around in the yard and look at all that I've done in my life. And therefore you're a repository of this calm. And what are we doing in the West, right? We're making pills so that 70-year-olds have the libido of 20-year-olds. Like, and nobody wants to die. Nobody does want to die, but nobody even wants to age. I mean, I think that by far the dimension in which the Western world could learn the most from the Eastern world is in the subject of mortality, what life and death really are, sort of that level of interconnectedness versus just fearfully clinging to youth. I mean, of course, everybody wants to be young. Everybody wants to be as healthy as possible. And there's nothing wrong with that for its own sake. But when that becomes the entire purpose of life, you really miss the forest for the trees, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it becomes a process where you're spent so much time doing that you forget being. And that's one of the concepts that my wife and we've been talking about back and forth, because my life I spent most of my life being, and then now I'm in a phase of doing, and it's completely against my grain. And so to me, doing is like dreadful. But I'm getting
topic here. We'll go into greater depth, but continue for now.
Yeah, but I'm doing and doing and doing and doing it. And when I look at myself, I forgot that I forgot to be. And my wife is now, she's being, and before she was doing and doing and doing and doing, and she burnt herself out to where she was forced to just be. And so now she's being. And so we're talking about these things and we're trying to balance things out. And so I'm now switching over to both being and doing when necessary. And until we see until we see the extremes, we don't recognize, oh, this is unhealthy, because just being can't pay for the bills, can't pay for, like, you can't do these things that are essential. And then and doing, you're not present, and you're burning yourself out.
Yes, there's definitely this is rich ground for philosophical interpretation, for the primary reason that it relates directly back to conflicting notions of time. And you already said that in the very beginning, and it's true. To the Eastern mind, and also honestly to the pre-scientific Western mind, if you go all the way back to like indigenous Viking culture or things like that, where people were still living basically like Native Americans lived, but on the European continent a couple thousand years ago, they're much more aware of the seasonality and the cycle of time. Time is a cyclical event in the Eastern mind as well as the Middle Eastern mind, and time is notoriously linear in the Western mind. And
yes.
So what you're getting at is the difference between conscientiousness and consciousness.
Right.
And conscientiousness is the great Western value, right? The so-called Protestant work ethic, building skyscrapers, taming the wild American continent. I mean, there's a lot of good and bad with all that, but better or worse, the world the past couple centuries has been shaped in our image. Our institutions, our way of business dress has replaced every traditional costume. I mean, it's the way now, for better or worse. And at the essence of conscientiousness is sacrificing the present for the future.
Correct.
The essence of it. And obviously, if you never do that, unless you're trying to be a rock star or something, you're still going to have a very short life, right? Because you're never making plans. You're never saving acorns, right? And the Eastern, to the extreme, like you said, is simply being. And largely, that comes at a fatal level as a result of being in, if you're a poor person in India or China, you don't really have much of a choice. You get very reflective and the closest Western philosophy would be like Stoicism. And you just kind of accept what's happening to you because you don't really seem to have a choice. You're sacrificing, you don't know what the future is. You don't know if you have one. Especially in the 20th century in China specifically, life was very short and violent. And, there was you're really just setting yourself up for disappointment to be too conscientious and to miss what moments of joy and beauty you do have. Whereas absolutely, we live as though linear time has no end. We're conscientious to the point of forgetting everything about life that you're working for. I don't mean to pick on him, but my father's a prime example of this, quite frankly. He's just like something from a Dickens novel. I mean, it was work, 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 work. And now in his 70s, he's trying to travel the world and be a young man and be a little bit before he dies. And, we're estranged to a certain degree because I had no desire to repeat this pattern. I traveled the world in my 20s because to me, that was appropriate to the season of my life that I was in. Mm-hmm. So now hopefully those desires won't kind of, kneecap me later because they're out of my system. So I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, but I very much love this idea of working out, doing, and being. It's absolutely essential. If you look at the colonial history of Asia and what the West was able to do to very proud, powerful cultures like Japan and China, it's largely to do with the fact that they didn't have enough conscientiousness to push back. They were subject to the doings of the West. And so, yeah, this is definitely fascinating. I think it goes back to the notion of time itself.
Yeah. And then the thing is, like, if you look at just Japanese tea ceremony or Tai Chi or the way just the art, all of those things are so precise, just being, so very, very present. And that is, to me, it's so profound when you see it. I can't find words to capture it, but in me observing it, I can observe the other individual just simply being, and that is in and of itself is profound. So I enjoy other people connecting with their divine. It's quite profound.
Well, there's a great lesson for the Western mind to be learned here, and it's we just simply cannot accept ever. COVID is, I'm not saying it is an example, but it's a potential example. The machinations of the federal government following the Great Depression in the 1930s are an example. The Western mind cannot, at any rate, for any reason, accept the fact that sometimes doing absolutely nothing at all is the appropriate course of action. It's a very big thing to do nothing, right?
Yes.
Like it takes a great degree of willpower. For example, had the stock market crash in 1929 been allowed to ride, it wouldn't have basically contaminated every other economic facet of the country. This has been accepted by this point in history. I mean, even former heads of the Federal Reserve have admitted as much themselves. We just can't accept that. Our ego or our willpower cannot accept the idea that simply taking a deep breath, sitting still, at least for a while until more information comes in, is the appropriate course of action. And if you look at China on the political stage, their greatest weapon is superhuman patience, especially compared to the Western mind. would you say then, maybe going into yin and yang a little bit, you have a masculine and a feminine energy. Is this being more related to the feminine energy and this doing more related to the masculine energy traditionally?
Traditionally, yes, correct. Like if you think about, and some people might be thinking
masculine and feminine, right?
Right. And the thing is, when I talk about this, some people might think that the comments, what we be talking about might be a little crude, but it is so, if you look at just biology in and of itself, for men, when it comes to sex, okay, let's just talk about that. For men, we're light switches. We're on or we're off, and we're ready or we're not. For women, like, they're a hot iron, man. Like, if you want them to be hot, they need to put the pilot light on. You gotta wait a little bit. You gotta romance. There needs to be intimacy, that connection, that you work every way in order for you to win her, in order for you to get the thing that you wanted. And so the feminine energy is really about all the tiny little details that allows you to, essentially, for men, we want the thing, but women, there's all these other things that need to happen in order for that to occur. And there needs to be an awareness for observing. Ooh, I'm losing because I got so deep here in my head. Sorry, but there's an observation of the feminine. The feminine is very, very complex, and we have to spend so much time trying to learn it. And in many respects, the feminine is the chaos,
right?
And for us, we're the control. Or as I was saying earlier, before we shut the video, I said, women are controlled chaos and men are chaos control. Or what did you say? Chaos.
Or a chaotic order. Yeah.
Chaotic order. Yeah.
Sure. No, that makes sense. So basically, this goes into all kinds of Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung archetypes. More recently, Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot. And a big part of the Western prejudice, unconscious Western prejudice, is the negative interpretation of chaos itself. Right? A lot of women, or some men even, will react very negatively to that characterization because they think of chaos as being inherently bad. But it seems that both the feminine and the masculine have sort of morally good and morally bad manifestations of themselves. Chaos, right, is unlimited potential also. Is that correct?
Correct.
I mean, it's sort of the womb of the universe, in a sense.
Yes. It's expansion. It's about expansion of self. So when we look at martial arts, perfect example.
Yes.
Every martial arts punches and kicks. You have punch, kicks, elbows, shoulders, headbutts, whatever you want to use. But all of that is the form. All of that is the control. And then, but when you find people like Bruce or oh gosh, who's the guy? Senchai. Anyways,
yeah.
You can find guys like that, and you see guys, the moment they take that structure and they express themselves through it, that chaos is that art form that allows them to take that same structure and have it in so much control that they are able to express themselves. And so this was the thing that Bruce was talking about. He's like, you need to take the structure and then break free from it. And then you become yourself, because you are truly expressing yourself.
It's very interesting. The great American musician Miles Davis once said and he's famous for using what the Chinese in their visual art would call kong tiao, or empty space, the use of space itself. And he was famous in music for saying, it's not the notes you play, it's the notes that you don't play that matter.
Yeah.
Like, where silence is what makes my music. And I always found that a very fascinating idea. It makes sense. If practicing martial arts myself, when I think of grappling, if you're stiff as a board and you're super rigid, you're going to get folded up, right? If you blindly just always attack, you're going to get folded up. And obviously you just can't sit in a lotus posture and give no resistance either, because you're going to get folded up, right? It's almost like martial arts itself could be thought of as a competitive finding of the balance point for a given situation, and whoever does it first and most effectively is likely to win.
Mm-hmm.
And I find physical manifestations of things fascinating. I've also been drawn to surfing, right? Because all energy in the universe is waves. And, you know, an ocean wave is literally just a physical wave at a human scale. It can be touched and interacted with and ridden, and, you know, it can smash you and all sorts of things. So it's interesting finding these universal principles. One thing that I found very interesting in China was, you know, somebody asked me once, there's actually a student of mine I was teaching English to, says, "Mr. Wesley, what does it mean the captain goes down with the ship?" And this just stood out in my mind as one of the greatest differences between the East and the West. I had difficulty explaining that. And it dawned on me at the moment that that's an entirely Christian principle, right? That the leader sacrifices themselves on behalf of the flock is certainly not a standard of human leadership over time. Because what does this mean, captain go down with the ship? And it's like, well, you know, it's his responsibility. So, you know, they'll be the last person to leave because everybody else underneath them. I'm trying to explain all this. The person just shook his head at me and goes, "This makes no sense. Why be captain if you just go down with the ship? The entire point of spending your entire life trying to get promoted to captain is so that in the event of a tragedy, you would be the one person to survive." Right? And this is maybe somewhat related to yin and yang, but it's also, you know, certain aspects of culture are just sheer demographics and numbers. And it dawned on me, you know, it's a totally different culture. There is a surplus of people. It doesn't make the Chinese any less empathetic or anything like that, but it's a very hard sell when the one thing you have in superabundance is people. That this rugged individuality and sanctity of the individual and all the foundations of Western thinking, and in the post-Enlightenment era anyway, they're almost like seeds that can't be planted in that soil, right? And many of the ideas from there are almost like seeds that aren't native to our soil, and they simply won't grow here. You could try to plant them and try to water them, but, you know, without a massive demographic or philosophical change, they simply won't take. And I think that's something the Western mind screws up quite a bit. We want to import Denmark's healthcare system. It's like, well, how, right? We're not them. You can't, it's the same as trying to make Iraq a modern democracy. You can't just pop a little piece of culture somewhere and expect it to grow like a native plant, to preserve this metaphor. What are your thoughts on that sort of, does that make any sense?
Yeah, that makes sense, because it's too much of you're overhauling everything.
Right.
And it's going to create that in and of itself is tyranny. And
yeah, it's very good.
And in doing so, it causes lots of chaos with the people, with their culture. I think that if it was done a little bit over time, and also people on both ends have discussions about what, you know, basically same here in here in the US. If we have folks on the left and the right talk, and there's common sense, and if folks are willing to admit, hey, yeah, that sounds right, that's a good idea, I'll drop mine so we can better serve the whole, then things will start to move in the right direction. But if you have people who aren't even willing to admit that I'm wrong, then we cannot come to any kind of resolution or any growth. And I think that's happening right now pretty.
Yeah. I can't agree with you more. Just really briefly, one thing that I would like you to go into greater depth on, because I'm kind of curious myself, is the nature of absolute truth and whether or not absolute truth even exists. The West has gotten to a point where it largely happened in the wake of World War II, which is somewhat understandable, right? Every religion, every denomination, every political ideology, every machination of human reason failed miserably, led to complete and total ruin. So most of the postmodernism, most of the nihilism, a lot of the relativism that characterizes our age was born in the mostly French intellectuals after World War II. And I think a part of the reason that we're unable to reconcile even what should be basic problem solving comes from the fact that the very notion that there is a reality that you can be closer or further from. There are truths that you can either align yourself with or try to fight at your peril. That very concept has been questioned. That very concept has been undermined. To many in the Western political game, there is no truth aside from power. It's simply whatever rhetorical device I need to win right now, whatever I need to employ, whatever allies I need to make, whatever positions I need to drop or pick up in order to win is what I will do. There is no truth beyond wielding the power. Now, obviously that dynamic shapes human destiny to a great degree. I personally find it absolutely fatal to disregard the notion of a universal truth. So what is the relationship between truth with a capital T and these Eastern systems that you're describing?
So I don't think anybody.
No belief in it.
So for myself, this is all personal because nothing I've read, but these are just things I've observed through life, through my clinical practice and treating patients, and also just teaching students. I'm really just observing myself. And when I observe myself, I spend time self-reflecting every day. So when I said, like, I ask myself the question every day, how am I creating my own suffering?
Yes.
I want folks to know that when I do self-reflection and I observe myself, I am a maniac when it comes to that. I observe myself as if I don't know myself. I really observe all the undercurrents of the voices that are occurring subconscious level and all the rational thoughts that I'm making. I'm making a decision based on what's coming from in here, because there's all these, your biology plays a role in how you think. If we change if we added testosterone to your body, automatically your psychology begins to shift and change. So
Sure.
there's a very, very real aspect to that. So anyways, going back to that is that, so for myself, I view the world as, if I do come up with one, I would say that it is all divine chaos. That everything is, as individuals, now this is more of a spiritual, but maybe even philosophical topic, but I think that we're all here to grow. And growth requires some growing pains, and sometimes those growing pains, they will hurt. And I think that sometimes the way I view it is that I view us all as individuals as acorns with programming that is designed to become the great oak tree. And some people, they don't want to become the great oak tree, or would consider what Bruce called the dragon, right? And, most folks, we are all encoded as an acorn to become this great grandiose oak tree. And the thing is that what we choose to do with it will depend on our environment. And what shapes us is the sun, the rotation, the seasons, the squirrels, all of these things that are outside of us, that are outside of our control. All of these things are shaping us. So our relationships, the schools we go to, the family that we're born into, all of these things are the things that shape the acorn and allows it to choose whether if it wants to grow into becoming the great oak tree. And so I view every tough lesson in life as an opportunity for growth, to see, where am I failing? How am I? And when I say that, I don't say where am I failing and feel miserable about myself. I'm saying, how did I do it wrong, and how am I going to correct myself? And so when I say, what am I learning here? Because this is a big trouble. This is a big problem that I'm running into, and I need to really look at this. So as I was saying in the last video, I gave my wife the month of April where I initiated nothing. And glad to say this morning we were good to go. And I said to her, when she was making her lunch or breakfast this morning, I came up and hugged her from behind, and I just kind of held her and hugged her from behind. And I said to her, because I stopped initiating, I had to stop doing this too. And she said, well, don't stop doing that. I was like, but as a guy, like, yeah. I'm either all in or all out. If you want me to serve this thing, then I need to do this. And so So in other words, like, I'm kind of going all roundabout, but the idea is that you are essentially shaped by your surroundings. Just like the acorn, you are shaped by your surroundings. And whether you choose to let your surroundings cut you down and you stop growing, then that's your prerogative. But for me, I'm going to become the great oak tree. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to pull from the nutrients that I am embedded into and try to become the great oak tree. And we have to view everything that is teaching us, my life, and your life path, all the people that's brought you, your situations, that's made you you. That's what's made you the dragon, the great oak tree. And until we can look at that and also say, oh, you planted me here in northern Minnesota versus in the south, okay, fine.
Right.
I'm planted here, so now I'm going to take advantage of this and I'm going to be me. So the idea is for us to capture and really review your lives as far as to what was the path I was given.
Right.
And I'm going to do one more. I'm going to jump to the side again a little quick with another story because my head's all popping all over the place. But back at the last year we had the 20th year reunion for the military school with all the guys, and I was talking to Nick Jasmine and Greg Epstein, and they're like, "So Peng, what are you doing?" I was like, "I'm an acupuncturist, man. I'm doing this, that, and the other thing." And they just kind of looked at me and they're like, "Dude, you are doing exactly what we thought you would be doing." and in that moment, I looked at I thought about it because I was like, "What?" And then I looked at my life and I looked at me at that time when they knew me, and we all knew each other as kids. And I had that programming encoded within me. Somehow I knew if I press here, I do that, it does this thing. And so when I really look at me from my childhood, just observing, I have designed, I call it the divine software that has programmed me to become who I am today. And in order for me to serve, folks the way that I should be serving folks. And so until we look really within and also observe our lives, because it's not out there, man. Like in the West, everybody's just searching it out there.
Yeah.
In the East, all the answers are in here, and you have to really review your life, and then you got the formula.
Yeah.
So, sorry, long tangent, but
no, it's great. And that is something I think that aligns itself fairly well with at least much of Christianity. We believe that we were all individually created for a purpose, that God has a plan for your life. And discovering and executing that purpose is more or less your duty. And I think that when people drift from that, now, if somebody else comes up to you and tells you what your purpose should be, and you can't do anything other than that purpose, you get something like the caste system in India or whatever, then obviously that is when order becomes tyrannical. Yep. But provided that people are free to discover their own purpose and then pursue it, I think that, provided that is an intrinsic process over which the individual has individual control, that seems to me like a very small price to pay to our creator or the universe or whatever you want to call it, for the price of life, right? For the purpose of living. And I think that one of the ways in which you're absolutely right about pain. Pain is it's there, right? If you sit on the couch and let yourself go to the point of developing severe chronic health diseases, it hurts, right? It literally hurts. You can't get up and walk. Everything hurts, and it hurts to go work out as well, right? It hurts. So pain is everywhere, right? So the question to me is, where is there beneficial hurt? Like what hurt? The hurt is there, period. So what hurt is going to make me, like you said, grow, and what hurt is just, damage, and avoid those and go for the beneficial ones. One point that I think where Christians have in the past, not so much anymore, but they can certainly go a little extreme, is Jesus in the tradition is a perfect divine example, right? It's a human that is one with God. So the entire, the premise of Christian theology is that the life of Jesus is a perfect lesson. Like, emulate this in order to achieve these levels of enlightenment. And I think where a lot of people have made the mistake, particularly during the Middle Ages and the darker periods of Christian history, is, well, Jesus suffered, and Jesus suffered horribly. Therefore, there is a holiness in suffering. Go find suffering. Go whip yourself and starve yourself. And it's like, hold on a minute. I think a more sober interpretation would be, when confronted with suffering, especially in the form of oppression or injustice, here is your example of how to do it like a perfect human being, not like a savage animal. Here's how to literally be crucified and not lose a shred of your empathy, and not lose a shred of your humanity and your compassion and your spirit, to literally be praying for the people who are doing this to you. This is how you suffer if you find yourself in the worst of life's circumstances. You have a template, you have an example to follow. Does not mean go crucify yourself, right? And I think where we get in a lot of trouble, and there's the notorious guilt and the issues that sort of plague this tradition. And I think what I'm hearing, and I think you're very much right, it seems as though this process begins with the feminine and gets bumped to the next level and reset by the masculine. Because before you can go take corrective action in your life, you need to observe where it's necessary. You need to find that introspective spot that you're speaking of, that you can't even put words on, that is such a foreign place to most Westerners, long before you go out executing your laundry lists of tasks. Is that more or less what you're saying?
Correct. Like, you first start with this question, like, why am I left-handed versus right-handed?
Yeah.
Why? Why the hell are we programmed in such a way? Like, why are people left-handed versus right-handed? And then you have to start asking yourself these inner questions as far as to, why do I like tomatoes and why do I not like? Why do I like this versus why do I not like that? And it gets into these very, very deep existential questions when you start to ask questions that really allow you to understand yourself to such a profound level. Like, I know this might get a little woo, but I think folks might get it. Like, as a kid, I was always something about petite brunette white women that drove me nuts. And anytime, and it's not that I didn't find other women attractive. It was just every time this type hit in front of me, I'd look twice. You know what I'm saying? And then it wasn't until I met my wife, and I was like, dude, oh my God, this whole time there was this program, there was this software that was within me and I had to look real hard here, and then there you are. And so once I met my wife, I was like, okay, so this coding was here. I just needed to look for it, and we will feel it within us. It will feel right. And this is where feminine kicks in. Feminine is because masculine is we're thinking it. The feminine is feeling it. And when you feel it, it's completely different. And so once I was like, oh, I was like, honey, it was all this time I was looking for you. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have to ask ourselves these questions. Why am I left-handed versus right-handed? Start there. And then we begin to have self-inquiry into the divine that is within you. It's not outside. It's both outside, but also inside. But you have to ask these questions. Why am I left-handed? Why am I right-handed? It's profound. It's profound.
It's very fascinating. I think it lines up neatly with a fairly difficult philosophical idea called predestination, which is something that came from the founder of Presbyterianism, John Calvin, and is basically just a deductive proof from assuming the existence of God as an omnipotent, omniscient being that is interested in humanity and is morally perfect with perfect judgment. That's the philosophical list of traits in order to call something God. The judgment one is interesting. That came later, much later, because somebody realized omniscience doesn't cover it. You can know every fact in the world and still act like an idiot, right? So perfect judgment has to be added to this divine laundry list of attributes, right? But anyway, predestination is basically the idea that God knows everything by virtue of being God, right? He's beyond time, beyond everything. So if that's the case, how does free will exist? Because free will is what determines whether or not you know, where your soul ends up is based on your life. It's not just written before you're born. So how does predestination line up with free will? Somebody we both know and probably both respect, Michael Grayfow, and I actually had this conversation. For those of you who don't know, he's the former counselor slash priest, Episcopal priest at St. John's Military Academy. He referred to himself as a tolerated anomaly, which I think is a great description of him. But anyway, I asked him this question about predestination. I said I was going to go work for the Presbyterian Church, and I was just curious about the idea. And he said, in his way, we were actually driving to, it's a long story, but there was a groundhog on his property that got caught in a live trap. So we were supposed to go buy some like tea biscuits and things to have tea, because this is a British guy. We were going to have afternoon tea, and it's all. So on the way to get pastries for tea, we have to drop off a groundhog in the middle of a park somewhere. So as we're dropping off this groundhog, I'm talking about predestination. And he goes, oh, well, that's easy. That's very easy. On the way home, at some point, my wife is going to call us and remind us to go get the pastries for tea. I know that this is going to happen. I in no way made her do it, though. I just know that she's going to do it because I've been married to her for however long, right? He didn't force her to do it. He in no way diminished her free will not to do it. But sure enough, we get in the car, and 10 minutes later, phone call comes, don't forget to get the pastries, right? I think the divine truth that you're speaking of that requires this introspection is put there, and free will perhaps accounts for whether or not you feel like noticing it or acting on it. How far up the tree do you want to grow is up to you, but everybody's been given a divine acorn. I really like that.
Yep.
And I think meditation and in the Western tradition, prayer could perhaps even be best described as tools by which to find your inner purpose.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fascinating. The idea of looking outward versus looking inward is certainly one of the main primary differences. And to bring it back to where we started, on medicine, I think it's safe to say, Eastern medicine will prevent you getting sick in the first place. But if things have gotten that far, you need action.
Yep.
Right? Go to the Mayo Clinic, get under all the microscopes, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So don't allow things to get that bad in the first place, but it's almost like crisis management in the event that they have gotten that bad. Look to Western ways in those moments because it's extremely yang. It requires extreme action. That's what I'm getting out of this.
Yep.
But you avoid those moments in the first place.
We do our best to avoid those moments.
Yeah, right. And what do they teach you in martial arts, right? What is the best defense? Is not to have any enemies.
Yes, that's true.
It's a lot safer to be extremely well liked than it is to be a skilled boxer that ruffles everybody's feathers. I can speak from personal experience on that.
And for me, I'm too nice.
Until you're not, right?
I mean, if somebody's gonna hurt my kids and my family, nope, a demon's coming out. But if we're just sparring for fun and you're having a bad day and you kind of want to punch me in the face a little bit more, I might, But yeah, it's. I've been observing life. Just this is not, I haven't read it anywhere. Just observing things, and I think that it isn't an either or when it comes to fate or free will. I think that it is both. I think that there is the code that we are given. For example, again, where the acorn with that is coded with to become the great oak tree, and that's there. Whether we choose to accept or grow is dependent on us. But within us, that's why there is so much chaos. Yes. That's why homeless people opt out. That's why there is the drinking. That's why there's the alcohol. That's why there's, like drugs and alcohol. There are all of these things in order for people to unplug from that code. Yes. That code is in our very being, telling us how we should be and where we should go and how we should become. And
that can be overwhelming.
It is overwhelming, man. That's why I'm taking cold showers every day, because
Yeah. Well, there's definitely something to be said for that at various levels of scale. Again, you nailed the primary thesis of a great post-war sociology book by Eric Fromm, I think I mentioned last time, called Escape from Freedom. And he's the first Western mind anyway to really realize and analyze that, people will clamor about freedom until they achieve it. And then the responsibility that comes with it is terrifying. And they will very quickly give it away again to whatever authority comes along and promises to manage the chaos on their behalf. And that's an absolutely profound thesis. Like if you look at, and this is something that I really appreciate from Eastern philosophy, that the Taoists look at things like Western political revolutions with a detached coolness. Like you're just fighting like the forces of nature. This will not matter, right? And if you actually look at the history of revolutions, first of all, the American Revolution wasn't a revolution. It was a decolonization. Right? We threw off a foreign power. A true revolution is more of a civil war. I mean, the American Civil War is a greater attempt at revolution than the revolution was, but that's a technical note.
I get where you're going, though.
Right. Inequality in the Russian and French revolutions is way worse for the 20, 30, 40 years after the revolution than it ever was beforehand. It's like people are so afraid of making the inward changes that they'll literally rather burn down the entire world externally in order to not even have to look at that part of oneself, just so they have all this activity to point to and say, look at all the things that have changed, right? When in reality, without the internal change, there is no change. You're just rearranging the offices of power and the unequal distribution of funds. It's just really putting a different hat on something. It's not a different person. It's not a different spirit. And I really appreciate the cool detachment with which the East looks at our political chaos. Because, ultimately, until that internal reckoning is done, you're just putting on a big fanfare and a big show. I think there's a lot of truth to that. If you look at, anytime an authority is displaced, the dream is always to have sort of, self-governance or something like that. But it never, ever occurs, not even for a moment. There's just a new authority that falls immediately into the vacuum. Like if you look at the Protestant Reformation, the authority of the church and the priests was basically replaced with the authority of God and the Bible. God himself through the Bible in the words, you read it yourself. The birth of the modern German language is the translation of the Bible. Translating it from Latin into common language, it's a hard thing to even comprehend anymore, but that was incredibly important. All the information that was driving society, a priest class had monopoly on. And I don't mean to burst anyone's bubbles here, but the Tibetan priest class wasn't terribly different. I mean, there's plenty of political abuse of religion in the East as well as the West. But anyway, the point is, the second the authority of the church was bucked, all it did was create a vacuum. So the authority of the Bible had to fill that vacuum, and immediately. And every time we replace something with something else, you're just really starting to cycle over again. And until that inward reflection occurs, there will not be any meaningful change. And that's what frustrates me so much about Americans' obsession with barely different political parties. Like, I don't know what to say. Like, it's not going to fundamentally change your life, your personal goals, your demons, your issues. Who sits in the White House? I mean, it's important, but it's almost like we're existential once every 4 years for a couple of months, and then think that process is somehow the process itself we want to put outside of us in the West. I think we're doing it at great error and great danger to ourselves.
Yeah, and I think the problem with it, the problem I see is that we tend to look at individuals who are in these leadership positions in only one role, and they're not one role. Just like you and I, we're not just sons. We're men, we're this, we're that, and then whatever roles that we are, we have to try to find a way to sort of integrate all of ourselves. And I think that until and the way I see it is that business is starting to shift from very masculine to now more feminine. And And the reason why I say that is because even if some guy has a service that is a product or a service that is lower quality than another big company, if that small guy tells me his story and I fall in love with his story, I'm going to back that guy up. And so business is starting to shift in a way where we are looking at the individuals and we want to feel connection. Whereas before it's very masculine. Here's our product, it's the best it is. Da 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 da.
Right.
People want to be involved in the community now, so there's more about a connection. And I think that as things start to shift to becoming more feminine, there's going to be a lot of a lot of friction right now. But I think the goal is that eventually things will kind of smooth out. It's just a swing of the pendulum. Like the feminists are going way too masculine, and it's not serving them. Because all the things that we're fighting for, I want them to have it, but not the overthrow of men, not the overthrow. There needs to be equality in what they're trying to do. So, but yes, so the shift from masculine to the feminine, and for me, I'm watching it and see how things kind of play out.
So what do you think? So another just sort of an intuition I got when I was living in China is that despite being, an authoritarian government, despite a lot of ways in which the West would even use the word backwards to describe human rights and things of that nature, and it's a bit of a pejorative term, but despite being sort of a different level in many issues, it seems that there's a much more sober understanding of our place in the world. When I say that, I mean the very limits of human power themselves seem to be more soberly almost in the body there, just understood. Like nobody would expect, an election to be the primary variable in a public health disaster, for example, where the real variables are travel and population density, hygiene habits, and what kind of health practices the people at risk are dealing with. And it seems that the fundamental real engine of cause and effect, the force, the Tao, God's will, whatever you want to call it, the thing that actually makes things work itself, we like to think is us and our decisions, that is the highest force on the planet. And perhaps the most valuable lesson possible to learn from the East is simply that that's not the case. I don't know. I mean, I don't think Xi Jinping would somehow believe that running China means that he could end global poverty, for example. People talk about having guaranteed jobs or guaranteed income. It's like, okay, so there's nothing anyone can do anymore that will cause them to not thrive. There's no decision somebody can make to hurt themselves, to make it so they don't survive. I mean, it seems absurd to suggest anything could fill that role. You know what I'm trying to get at? It's almost like the forces of nature themselves are more respected and revered in the East, whereas they tend to be a nuisance in the West, despite the fact they're subject to them.
It's complicated when we're talking about governing people, and this is all talked about in the Tao Te Ching as well.
If you want a certain thing, pushing as hard as you possibly can for it will inevitably create a backlash. Therefore, there's probably a better way to get that thing. Like the shortest distance between 2 points in the political world is not a straight line. Is that?
Yeah. But if I were a dictator,
right,
there would definitely be like a universal basic income for folks to at least not starve. Because what we're seeing right now is that with COVID going down and people are running out of money, man, and this is not good. So just meet the basic needs, and then just to really encourage folks to. We need to change I feel that we really need to change the way we view our individual places in the world and how we can bring more light to it to help kind of shift it. We all see a problem. We all see a problem in the world, and we tackle the one that we can handle. and we have solutions to those problems. And so I think that when we start to really search and also start to serve in this way, we start to kind of move society. It's a very, very big one. So
Looking inside.
My answer is pretty simple. You be the change you want to see.
Hey, you know what? Simple. You know, I've always believed, the fundamental thesis of true science, and everybody's sort of expressed this in one way or the other, but Einstein probably most famously, any idiot can add layers of complexity to something, but simplification takes an act of genius.
Yeah. I think Confucius said it.
Yeah, right. That could very well be. I mean, and you see, whenever you see an axiom like that pop up everywhere from 20th century physics to, ancient Chinese philosophy to ancient Greek philosophy to everywhere. I mean, that's really the big reason to study all the different traditions. When you see that all of them, for example, have some version of the golden rule, it's like, okay, well, maybe this really did come from a higher authority, right? Because there's no way, like, people are just so smart and so on the same page that they'd all come to that wonderful conclusion, And I think that is a great place to potentially leave it, to meditate on the difference between knowing to be concerned about the world, but turning that into knowing how to be effectively concerned about the world.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, for example, you could care about the climate all you want, but marching up and down the street screaming about it isn't going to do anything. Now, if every activist in the world were the croc hunter, would there be a single endangered species left? Maybe, maybe not, right? But go be the change you want to see in the world is I think is great. And it does require this synthesis, because if you just do, you're not going to be the change that you want to see in the world. You're going to be the change that some advertisement you saw or some book you read wants you to be in the world. And if you only sit around meditating on your purpose, well, then you never get anything done.
Exactly. It is both. And one of the things I found is that we, in the West, we make things, well, all of us as human beings, we make things complicated in order for them to be simple.
Very true.
And simplicity is the best way to go about things.
Simple isn't always easy, and easy isn't always simple. There's a big difference.
Correct.
One of the great principles of the West, and we've talked about this, and I've also talked about it in my logic, is deduction, right? Just getting to the core, stripping away layers. And a lot of people don't know this if they haven't read the New Testament, but one of the great simplifications in history was taking the incredibly complicated history of Jewish jurisprudence and tradition, and in the form of Moses, it was condensed to 10 rules. Right? It's a nice round number. These are 10 things you don't do. Everybody can remember that. It's the basis of a culture for thousands of years. But one thing that strikes me as ingenious in the life and teaching of Christ is that he further reduced them to a single commandment: to love one another as I have loved you. That's it. There aren't 10 anymore. There's one. And that's probably the most difficult thing in the world you could possibly do, to actually turn the other cheek to all those who would harm you. Almost nobody really pulls that off. I think the closest really in our tradition would be almost the Amish, right? I mean, there was an instance of somebody, horrible tragedy. There was like a school shooting in an Amish school, and they simply forgave everybody, and that's it. I mean, that is, I don't know. I don't think I could really ever do that, personally.
I'm not there yet.
I'm not there yet either, but I love that idea of, you look inside yourself to find what your programming is and go live it, because that's what you've been put here to do. I think it's a wonderful synthesis of the traditions, and it all begins with looking inside, which of course is the one place you can't hide from yourself from. You can't hide from yourself there, in that place.
Yeah. And I want to talk about,
nobody wants to look there.
Yeah, that's where it's hidden. The divine hid it inside, so we would what? Like, on purpose. I feel that that's in purpose. And I also wanted to differentiate between when the West talks about meditate, it's more like think.
Right.
the East talks about meditate, it's more like sit and be.
Yeah.
So, and so just this East and West concept, when both are correct, and it just depends on the situation that you're currently in front of, and applying it and knowing when to apply it. So I'm doing, I've been discovering this since talking to you, man. So I really enjoy the stimulating conversations.
I appreciate it likewise. I just turned 40, so it's a good time for self-reflection and all that.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you too, man. Let's
Awesome. Take care.
talk again. Take care.
Yes, sir.